I'm currently chairman of ZoomWorks, and we're a niche provider of consulting, IT consulting and outsourcing. So when I'm talking about outsourcing, I'm very much going to talk about providing development skills. So that's the area that we one of the key areas that we focus in, and in terms of outsourcing, that's what I'm going to focus on today. We're a niche provider. We're a relatively small company. We actually started 14 years ago, so right at the height of the dot-com boom. I put the original business plan together, which I'm pretty sure said we'd all be off. We'd have sold our company within 2 years and all be driving Ferraris. Anyway, 14 years later, we're still here, and I don't have a Ferrari. But I do have 14 years of experience with consulting and outsourcing. So 16 years, actually, because I did 2 years before we started the company. One other thing. In terms of this presentation, I think Peter did a super job with the facts and the figures and the stats. This is going to be very much about my personal experience and the company's personal experience. So this will be very much the things that we've seen, the things that we feel. I'm not going to back it up with a lot of numbers, but please feel free to challenge it. I won't say much more about ZoomWorks, about the company, other than if you can read those. We're very proud of our clients. We've got some super clients we've worked with over the years. In terms of our technology outsourcing, the sweet spot for us is really companies that are heavily technology dependent. So companies that value technology not as an expense, not as something they have to do, but as a necessary cost, I should say, but as something they see as competitive advantage, something they see as necessary and vital to drive their revenues and to keep them at the tops of their industries. So, what is the key to the right outsourcing destination? I'm actually going to spoil the surprise. I'm going to tell you right up front what it is, or the two things that I think it is. First of all, cultural alignment. Now, it's good that this has come up already, so clearly I'm not disagreeing with all of the other speakers earlier on. But cultural alignment, in our experience, this is vital, and not just from a point of view of, do the Brits work well with the Romanians, or do they work better with Bulgarians? That is clearly important, but the other type of cultural alignment, I think it was mentioned as well earlier on, is the alignment between the customer and the service provider, the outsourced partner. So it's worth considering both of those. And communication. That sounds like a really simple one, but it's actually extremely important. And it's important that communication works at all levels with an organization. So not just at the steering committee that meet once a quarter to sort of talk about things that aren't going right. Communication's got to be open and free. So I'll come on to these a little bit more. We'll talk about just some other things that are kind of important, because you might be saying, well, that's all fine, but aren't there a whole bunch of things you need to do before that? How do you get to a point with, where you're ready to start discussing issues like this? And that's would be a very fair comment. Well, I'm kind of assuming you're going to do some research and due diligence on where you go. And some of the key things you obviously need to decide are you going to be nearshore or offshore? There's a lot of our clients who've gone and they've tried offshore. It didn't work for them, and they've come back and they've now tried nearshore, and that's a better fit. But I think in terms of nearshore and offshore, I mean, there are some pretty obvious things here. Are time zones important to you? Are the language skills important to you? A very important one is, what sort of growth rate do you want? Because if we get a client coming to us and saying, I want to build to 250 people in a year, then we say, I'm sorry, we can't do that for you. We simply cannot build that quickly. And you'll probably find you will find there are a lot of other places in Europe and Eastern Europe where that kind of growth rate is just impossible. So if that's what you're thinking, probably Eastern Europe is not for you. There are a number of other and as Peter again mentioned earlier on, there are skill levels. If the skill sets aren't there, then clearly you're in the wrong place. you can influence that with time. You can set up training academies. You can do all sorts of things like that. But, assuming you're wanting to get on with this in the next 5 years, then, that's not something that you're going to be able to affect in the short term. So these are sort of absolutes, things that you should be deciding on quite quickly. And I think one of the really important things here is that we found this when we've been in competitive situations. People come up and say, right, well, we've got a list of five suppliers and you're on the short list. And we go, great. Can we find out something else about, some of the other suppliers? And they go, well, we've got these 4 Indian companies and you. Which point we usually go, oh. Because what's actually happening there is you're really comparing apples with oranges. That's not to say, the Indian companies are all great and whatever, but, typically, there are going to be a whole bunch of things that we can do really well, also not just us, but Eastern European companies, nearshore companies can do really, really well that Indian companies are going to really struggle to do, and vice versa. So for example, one simple thing might be, do you want to work in an agile environment? Apologies to people who are not technical people here, but basically that means, rather than giving a big specification for a project and then coming back 6 months later and saying what's happened, it's something that means that you're in touch with the teams on a pretty much day-to-day basis to shape the development. So for that sort of thing, communication and time zones and good language skills and all this sort of stuff are really, really, really important. So, for companies that kind of go, well, we think we want to be in India, but we might want to be in Europe, I would say, well, actually, you haven't done your research right. You really haven't done your due diligence properly. Cost-quality trade-off. This is clearly a big one. Again, for systems, how important is it for you to have your systems working? If you're talking about your internal HR system, and that goes down for a couple of hours, that's pretty inconvenient, yes. But if you are running, let's say, a trading exchange, and that's down for 10 minutes at a very important time, that's potentially tens or hundreds of millions. So I would say, you've got to think about things like this. And if you're running a trading exchange, like some of our clients do, then, putting cost as your key driver, I would say, is probably going to end in tears at some point. So the volume versus a niche provider. This is very much, we're a niche provider, but, as I said before, we're not right for everything, that's for sure. And I think a lot of this is around control. How much influence do you want to have over your provider? And, I'm not knocking the big firms at all, that they are very, very good at certain things. But, if you go knock on IBM's door as let's say a 500 million turnover company with a relatively small outsource, how much power are you going to have in that relationship? Probably not a lot. Where with a company like us, my goodness, we'll be running around all over the place trying to do absolutely everything you want because we can't afford to lose, you as a client. People often say, you don't get fired for sorry, it's a bit cheeky actually, but you don't get fired for hiring IBM. Always wanted to run an advert saying, yes, but you don't get promoted either. And I think that's the thing. The big companies are extremely good at certain things. They really are good. But if you want control in a relationship and you want strong influence and you want people running around, as I said, smaller companies can't afford to have a failure. They really need to make sure that you succeed. So it's worth bearing in mind. And then there's this continuum, the outsourced, the dedicated team, the build, operate, transfer, or the captive model. Which one of those suits you? The outsourced, obviously being at one end of the spectrum, very much creating your specification, lobbing it over the wall, and getting regular feedback on how you're going. A dedicated team, that allows a more agile environment because those people are absolutely dedicated to you. They get to know your company. You start building up quite some good, strong relationships. A build, operate, transfer, which was mentioned earlier on, so building something that is specific for a client that at some point they may take over, or a captive. Companies that are very happy going out and going into a country and setting up an operation from scratch. So those are all things that, vital bits of due diligence. And that should, at the end of that, you should once you've made decisions about that, about skill base, as Peter said, and a bunch of other things, that is by no means an exhaustive list, by the way. You should be down to, and after a lot of hard work, you'd probably be down to a number of providers. Let's say you're down to, say, 5 providers or something like that. And those providers will probably be in multiple locations. I mean, in fact, I would suggest that is the best way to do it. If you're going to be in Eastern Europe, you don't necessarily want them all in Romania. You probably want 1 or 2 in Romania, a couple in Bulgaria, whatever. Whatever your choice is, whatever your shortlist is. And it's at this point that this stuff becomes important. Because now you're down to your 5 providers, and this is when you can start thinking about these 2 things. Because given what I've said about, from our experience, these are 2 absolutely critical things in any relationship. You really now ought to be starting to think about these things. And I'll just say one more thing. I mean, ultimately, this is probably pretty obvious, but if you've got these 2 things and they're working properly, you're going to get trust between organizations. And you can have all the SLAs in the world, but ultimately, if you've got a trusting relationship, you can go up and you can say to, as a provider, by the way, not just as a client company, but as a provider, we can go up to, we have the sorts of relationships where we can go up to our clients and say, we've actually got a problem here. Can you help us out? And they'll go, yeah, absolutely. Great, thanks for telling us. As opposed to going, we can't mention it. We can't say anything to the client. What are they going to say? Oh, my goodness, we've lost a key person. What are we going to do? We work collaborative to work these things out because there's trust between the organizations. Right, so how do you measure trust? Oh, that's a really tough one. Well, this is actually, a lot of this stuff can be quite soft, but it's things like, word of mouth. What are people saying about these organizations? Visits, for goodness sake, go out and meet people. Again, it's really obvious stuff, but go and meet the right people. Meet the people you're going to be working with. Go and have a beer with them, for goodness sake. That's a great way to get to know people. And talk with our other clients. So, I mean, those are some really obvious things that you can do to start, working out if you have potential cultural alignment and whether you can communicate well with people. So ultimately, I would say, you're down to your list of 5 providers, and they might be in different countries. The ultimate destination actually doesn't matter at that point, because the important thing is that you're getting your trust built up because you've got cultural alignment and you've got good communication. So, that to me is the important thing. So you've got down to your short list of companies, and the ultimate destination really doesn't matter. It's the culture and the communication that's important at that point. Just very quickly, I'll just cover a little case study. This was Zoomworks worked with Betfair. Betfair, if you don't know, are an extremely successful company. They do online gaming. They started up about the same time as us, and they're an awful lot more successful than we are. I have to say, they're one of these companies that's just done ridiculously well. They're valued at billions, and they're only 14 years old. Highly profitable company. We started working for them in about 2004, and in 2000 we had a team of 10 working for them in their Hammersmith office, and by 2006. Outsourcing was very much on the agenda for them. And they'd gone through a number of companies that they'd tried outsourcing with a number of companies, and it hadn't worked. And they're very open about the reasons it didn't work. I'm sure they'd be happy for me to share this. One was an extremely strong culture and a very positive culture. But very strong culture. And also there was very much, the not invented in here syndrome as well. They had quite a bit of that. So when they were working with outsourcing partners, it was very difficult for those partners to step up to the mark and deliver to the levels that their client was expecting. We had the advantage that we'd been working with them for a couple of years. So we actually had some trust built up. And we knew what their culture was, and we knew the right people to communicate with. So in many ways, we were sort of slightly ahead of the game. So when I turned around to the CTO and I said, I gather you guys are thinking of outsourcing. Well, we're off to Romania. How about that? Is that what do you think of Romania? And he said, well, actually, it wasn't even on our list. That's interesting. I said, well, I've been out there a few times, and I really, really, I said, we're going to start there anyway, but, if you guys are interested in coming and joining us, I really think you ought to come and have a look, which they did. We agreed, before we went out, we agreed a business model, we agreed what it would look like if we were to progress, and then we did a visit, and we spent a lot of time, because at that time we didn't actually have an office, so we had a number of people that we'd gone around, we'd spoken to, we'd effectively got a team together, and we'd started employing people. We didn't actually have an office to show them around like that, partly because we knew Betfair might come with us. So were we going to build to 20 people, or were we going to build to 100 people? We didn't really know, so hence we didn't want to start putting down big deposits on offices. But, so we spent an awful lot of time in coffee houses and meeting people over lunch and going for a few drinks in the evening, whatever. And the important thing was there, it wasn't just that I was taking them out, with my sort of business development or, salesman's hat on as such. We were going out and we were introducing to the people they were going to work with, and the CTO got to meet people, the very senior guys, but also some of the more junior guys that we planned to take on. And that for them was a massive thing. It was a huge thing. And to cut a long story short, we got back, and I think it was within 5 days they'd called up. It was on a Friday, and they said, right, can you get going next week? And I apologize to all the lawyers here, but we actually got going without a contract in place. We said, yeah, fine. And that was the kind of level of trust we had. We actually went down and we signed up for the office. We sent out a bunch more contracts for potential stuff, and we got going. And we put in a very, very significant investment, especially for a relatively small company, before we actually even had a contract in place. That was the level of trust we had. But also, it was a level of trust that we've been able to build up between us and ultimately the people that we're going to be providing the services, the IT services, in other words, the engineers, for the company, for Betfair. So that was great. I think the only other thing that was worth mentioning is that even once, and again, this has been mentioned earlier on, okay, so we'd been the green light, fantastic, certainly in our minds we had a contract in place, even if there wasn't actually one. Then the hard work began, absolutely, because the one thing we had to really, really, really focus on was the cultural alignment. If you remember earlier on, I said that Betfair had a very, very strong culture, and I said a very positive but very strong culture. And they didn't react necessarily particularly well to some of the cultural traits of the Romanians. And again, this is not a judgment on what's right or wrong, it's just saying they were different. And it took us quite some time to actually get the two sides aligned, and for them to start understanding that certain engineers weren't being difficult, but that their culture dictated that that's the way they should react to a manager's request. I could spend a long time talking about that, but anyway, that was basically a very successful partnership for us. And in 2009, we sold that business. It was up to just over 80 engineers to Betfair, which we built in about 2 years. So that was quite some going for a town in Romania. I think that's it, really. I mean, are there any questions on that? I mean, hopefully I said that's been useful. It's called Cluj-Napoca. It's the second town. It has 2 technical universities. As Peter would say, yes, you check the skills first. Absolutely, we checked the skills to make sure they were there. So that was very important to us. And there were a cluster of companies that were there. There were a lot of very good reasons why we went.
How many people do you have in Cluj? Maybe you said
now. Well, we were up to close to 200. I said then we sold off a big chunk.
Okay. Okay. And what's your attrition rate?
Oof, I don't know. I actually don't know what it is. It's definitely gone up in the last year, is all I can say. It's very competitive there at the moment. Very competitive.
And are you looking into maybe another country in Eastern Europe or elsewhere, just as a backup or to mitigate any risks?
We are doing exactly that.
Can you say anything about?
Yeah. No, we're looking elsewhere in Romania, and we're looking elsewhere in Eastern Europe as well. We're probably going to do both. Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem is right now we can't hire people quickly enough. So to your question earlier on about what would our growth rate has largely been limited by our ability to find people, not by not being able to attract new clients.
Yeah, I've just got a question on people and also location strategy. What's the impact of 2P when you're considering nearshore versus offshore?
Really interesting. We've never done 2P, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that, I'm afraid.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Steve Jackson, thank you very much indeed, Steve.